The invitation had been a curiosity, a verbal aside delivered with the casual condescension only the truly wealthy could muster. "You're a lifesaver, Marcus," Arthur Sterling had boomed, his hand clapping Marcus's shoulder a little too hard. "Saved my party. You should come. See how the other half lives, eh?" And so, Marcus was here, stepping from the water taxi onto the floating palace that was Sterling's yacht, the Legacy. He wore the same clothes he'd worn to the job, clean but undeniably practical work jeans, steel-toed boots, and a dark gray polo shirt with the subtle logo of his company, Aquarian Solutions, stitched on the chest. He hadn't had time to go home and change, and a part of him, a stubborn, defiant part, hadn't wanted to. The moment his boots hit the polished teak deck, a wave of silence rippled through the nearest cluster of guests. It was a subtle thing, a brief pause in the symphony of clinking champagne flutes and breezy laughter. Then, the whispers began, quiet as the sea breeze but sharp as fish hooks. He was a walking, breathing anomaly in their world of linen suits, silk dresses, and deck shoes that cost more than his entire outfit. A woman with a face pulled tight by surgery and judgment leaned toward her companion. "Arthur is so eccentric. Is that the caterer?" "Worse," the man murmured back, his eyes flicking over Marcus's calloused hands. "I heard he's the plumber." Marcus kept his expression neutral, a mask of polite indifference he had perfected over 2 decades. He had been in rooms like this before, though usually through the service entrance. He understood the language of the elite, the dismissive glances, the way they angled their bodies away from him, the smiles that never reached their eyes. He was a prop in Arthur Sterling's story of the day, the benevolent host who was so down-to-earth he'd even invite the help to his party. "Marcus. Glad you could make it." Sterling's voice sliced through the ambient chatter. He strode over, a magnificent specimen of curated wealth in a crisp white captain's hat and a navy blue blazer. "Everyone, this is Marcus. Fixed a catastrophic pipe burst at my estate this morning. A real artist with a wrench." The introduction hung in the air, branding him. Not Marcus, a guest, but Marcus, the plumber. A few people offered weak, fleeting smiles. Most simply looked through him. Marcus nodded politely. "Mr. Sterling. It's quite a vessel. Isn't she?" Sterling beamed, patting a nearby railing. 150 feet of Italian craftsmanship. "We're just waiting for the Ridgeways to arrive and then we'll head out past Montauk. Have you ever been on a yacht like this, Marcus?" The question was laced with the assumption that he hadn't. "I've been on a few boats," Marcus answered, his voice calm and even. A young man with floppy blonde hair and a smug grin, who Marcus guessed was Sterling's son, snorted into his glass. "I doubt any of them had a jacuzzi on the sun deck, mate." Marcus met the young man's gaze. "No. They didn't." He decided to take a walk, to remove himself from the epicenter of their soft-spoken ridicule. He moved along the edge of the deck, his hands in his pockets, observing. He saw the performance of wealth everywhere, the forced laughter, the competitive name-dropping, the women assessing each other's jewelry with the precision of auctioneers. They were all playing a part in a grand, expensive play. He found a relatively quiet spot near the stern, leaning against the railing and watching the marina's gentle activity. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. The beauty of it was a stark contrast to the ugliness he felt from the people on board. He wasn't angry. He was analytical. He had faced this his whole life. The assumptions made because of the color of his skin, the profession he had chosen to master. They saw a black plumber. They couldn't conceive of anything more. "It's rude, isn't it?" He turned. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, stood beside him. She had Sterling's sharp blue eyes but a much kinder mouth. She was holding 2 bottles of water. She offered one to him. "I'm Amelia. My dad's well, you've met him." "Marcus," he said, accepting the bottle. "Thank you." "I'm sorry about them," she said, gesturing vaguely at the party. "They live in a bubble. They see a man who works with his hands and their brains just short-circuit. They don't know what to do with you." "I'm used to it," Marcus said with a small, genuine smile. "But I appreciate you saying that." "My dad thought he was being progressive," Amelia sighed, taking a sip of her water. "He doesn't see that he's just putting you on display. It's his favorite kind of charity. The kind everyone can see." Her insight was so sharp, so accurate, it startled him. "You see people clearly. It's a curse in a family like mine," she said, her smile tinged with sadness. "So, are you really a plumber?" "I am," he confirmed. "Among other things." Before she could ask what he meant, her father's voice boomed again. "Ah, the Ridgeways are here. Cast off the lines. Let's show the Atlantic what a real party looks like." There was a cheer from the guests as the yacht's powerful engines rumbled to life. The vessel pulled away from the dock with a grace that belied its size, slicing through the calm harbor waters. As they cleared the breakwater, the open ocean greeted them, and the yacht picked up speed. For the next hour, the party was in full swing. Music pulsed from hidden speakers, and waiters circulated with trays of exquisite hors d'oeuvres. Marcus stayed near the stern, a silent observer. He watched Sterling hold court, telling a story about a hostile takeover, his guests hanging on every word. He saw the son, Julian, trying to impress a group of women by popping a bottle of champagne and spraying it wastefully into the sea. It was Julian who made the next move. He swaggered over to Marcus, his face flushed with alcohol and arrogance. Still here, then? Julian slurred slightly. Enjoying the free drinks? I'm enjoying the view, Marcus replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Look, I get it, Julian said, leaning conspiratorially. Dad probably paid you a handsome sum for today's work. But a tip from me to you, know your place. It's a bit tacky to hang around after the job is done. The insult was so direct, so devoid of any pretense, that Marcus almost laughed. He turned his body slowly to face the younger man. Your father invited me. My father collects things, Julian shot back. Art, companies, strays. Don't take it personally. Marcus held his gaze, his silence more powerful than any retort. He had built an empire by solving problems, by remaining calm in the face of pressure, be it from a burst water main or a torrent of prejudice. This spoiled child was nothing. It was then that the sky began to change. The brilliant sunset was being devoured by a bank of dark, bruised-looking clouds rolling in from the east. The wind picked up, whipping napkins off tables and sending a chill through the air. Just a summer squall, Sterling announced confidently, though he cast a nervous glance at his captain. It'll pass. But it didn't pass. Within 15 minutes, the sea, once a gentle swell, was a churning cauldron of angry, gray waves. Rain began to fall, first as a drizzle, then as a torrential downpour. The guests shrieked and ran for the cover of the main salon. The yacht, which had felt so stable, began to pitch and roll violently. A particularly large wave slammed against the port side, sending a shudder through the entire vessel. There was a loud, grinding crunch from below, followed by a high-pitched mechanical whine. The yacht listed sharply, sending glasses and plates crashing to the floor. Panic began to set in. The captain's voice, strained and urgent, came over the intercom. Mr. Sterling, please come to the bridge. We have a problem. Marcus, who had braced himself against the railing, felt the unnatural list of the ship. He knew this feeling. It wasn't just the storm, it was a mechanical failure. He watched Sterling, his face now pale, hurry toward the bridge. Amelia, who had been helping a guest who had fallen, stumbled over to Marcus. What's happening? The stabilizers are out, Marcus said, his voice low and certain. A boat this size, in a sea like this, without stabilizers, it's dangerous. As if to punctuate his statement, another wave hit, and the yacht groaned in protest. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into a terrifying, rain-lashed darkness, broken only by flashes of lightning. Emergency lights, dim and red, flickered on a few seconds later, casting long, dancing shadows. Screams echoed from the main salon. The captain and a frantic-looking engineer burst out from the bridge. The portside hydraulic stabilizer arm is jammed in the extended position, the engineer yelled over the wind. We hit a submerged container or something. It's acting like a rudder, pulling us hard to port. And the main pump is offline, I can't retract it. Can you fix it? Sterling demanded, his voice cracking. Not in this sea. The access panel is on the aft deck. It's impossible. They were being pulled into a dangerous broadside position against the waves, at risk of capsizing. Marcus watched the crew, young and panicked. They were sailors, not specialized hydraulic engineers. He knew, with absolute certainty, that they didn't know what to do. He pushed himself off the railing. Where's the access panel? He asked, his voice cutting through the chaos. The engineer stared at him. What? The hydraulic pump access. Where is it? Marcus repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. There, the engineer pointed to a large, flush-mounted hatch on the deck. But you can't, the panel is live, and it's flooded. Marcus was already moving. Get me your toolkit. And I need a headlamp. Now. Julian Sterling grabbed his arm. What do you think you're doing, Plumber? You'll get yourself killed. Marcus shook him off without a word. He knelt by the hatch, his experienced hands finding the manual release levers. The captain, seeing the look of absolute competence on Marcus's face, made a split-second decision. Get him the tools, he barked at the engineer. A moment later, a heavy-duty toolkit and a headlamp were thrust into his hands. Marcus strapped the lamp to his forehead, flicked it on, and opened the hatch. A torrent of seawater gushed out. Ignoring the cold and the danger, he peered inside. The space was a tangled mess of high-pressure hoses, actuators, and wiring, all sparking intermittently as they shorted in the water. The high-pitched whine was deafening. The main pump's thermal relay is tripped from the overload, Marcus diagnosed instantly, his voice a calm command center in the storm. We need to bypass it. But first, we have to manually release the pressure in the jammed actuator. Get me the largest pipe wrench you have. And I need to isolate the main power bus to this panel. The engineer, his face a mask of awe, just pointed. The breaker is on the bridge. Amelia, Marcus said, not taking his eyes off the mechanical nightmare. Go to the bridge. Tell the captain to kill the power to the aft stabilizer control unit. There should be a breaker labeled STBP control. Amelia, her fear replaced by a sense of purpose, nodded and ran. The guests had crept out from the salon, their morbid curiosity overcoming their terror. They watched, huddled in their ruined finery, as the man they had mocked just an hour ago prepared to risk his life. The wrench was in his hand. It felt familiar, an extension of his own arm. Power is off. Amelia yelled from the doorway. Marcus took a deep breath and plunged his arms into the flooded, sparking compartment. The water was icy, and the motion of the ship was violent, but his focus was absolute. He located the primary pressure release valve, a large, stubborn nut that was corroded and slick. His hands, the ones the guests had privately ridiculed, found their purchase. He positioned the wrench. He put his entire body weight into it, his muscles straining. The wind howled, the rain lashed down, but the only sound in his world was the creak of metal. With a groan of protest, the nut turned. A jet of hydraulic fluid and water sprayed his face. He ignored it, working quickly and methodically. He bypassed the fried relay, rerouted a secondary hose, and manually cranked a pressure valve. It was a brutal, physical, and intellectually demanding task. It was what he did. He solved complex problems involving the flow of liquids under pressure. It didn't matter if it was in a basement or on a multi-million-dollar yacht. The principles were the same. After 10 minutes that felt like an eternity, he pulled back. "Okay," he shouted to the captain. "Try to bring it online." Gently. The captain, his face full of a respect that bordered on reverence, spoke into his radio. A moment later, the horrible grinding noise was replaced by a steady, powerful hum. The violent list of the yacht began to correct itself. The ship slowly, miraculously, righted itself in the water. A collective sigh of relief, so loud it was almost a sob, went through the guests. The storm was still raging, but the immediate danger had passed. They were no longer at the mercy of the waves. Marcus stood up, soaked, greasy, and exhausted. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of black grease. He looked at the crowd of stunned faces. Arthur Sterling. His arrogant son. The woman who thought he was the caterer. They stared at him as if he were a god. As the storm began to subside, its fury spent, a new light appeared on the horizon. It was not the dawn. It was a set of powerful searchlights, cutting through the remaining rain. They belonged to a ship, a massive one, that was approaching them with impossible speed and stability, barely seeming to notice the heavy seas. It wasn't a Coast Guard cutter. It was a yacht. But it made Sterling's legacy look like a child's toy. It was easily twice the size, a sleek, black-hulled behemoth of glass and steel, a floating architectural masterpiece that radiated power and cutting-edge design. It pulled alongside them, its deck lights illuminating a crew that moved with military precision. A voice, amplified and clear, cut across the water. "Legacy, this is the superyacht Serenity. We tracked your distress. Do you require assistance?" Arthur Sterling, humbled and shaken, grabbed his radio. "Serenity, this is the Legacy. We are operational. We had a stabilizer failure, but it's been resolved." There was a pause. Then the voice from the Serenity came again, this time with a different, more personal tone. "Mr. Washington? Sir, is that you on their deck? We saw your personal locator beacon activate." Every head, including Sterling's, swiveled to Marcus. Marcus raised a hand, a calm, simple wave. "I'm all right, Captain Eva," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the water. "Just helping our neighbors out of a jam. Prepare the guest suite. I'm bringing one over. And I'll be ready for my debrief on the Singapore project in an hour." The silence on the deck of the Legacy was absolute. The only sound was the hum of the two yachts' engines and the gentle lapping of the waves. Julian Sterling's mouth was hanging open. "Mr. Washington?" Marcus turned to the stunned crowd. He walked over to Amelia, who was staring at him with wide, wondrous eyes. "Your father's yacht is fine, but I wouldn't take it out in heavy seas again until it's had a full diagnostic. Your friend," he nodded at her, "is welcome to join me for a proper drink on my ship if she'd like to get out of the storm." He then faced Arthur Sterling, who looked as if his entire world had been turned upside down. "You see, Mr. Sterling," Marcus said, his voice no longer just polite, but filled with a quiet, unshakable authority. "I am a plumber. It's how I started. I loved it. I loved solving problems. I built a small plumbing business into Aquarian Solutions, which now designs and implements water reclamation and hydraulic power systems for cities and private enterprises around the globe. That ship," he gestured to the magnificent vessel beside them, "is the Serenity. I designed its hydraulic stabilization system myself. I find it's best to know your product from the ground up." He let the words sink in. He looked at their faces, at the collapsed artifice of their superiority. "You invited me here to see how the other half lives," Marcus said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of a verdict. "You judged me by my clothes and my hands. You should have judged me by my work. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run." A boarding ramp extended from the Serenity with a silent, hydraulic hiss. Marcus turned to Amelia. "The offer stands." Amelia looked at her father, then at the stunned, foolish faces of his friends, and then back at the calm, capable man in front of her. She smiled. "I'd love to." As Marcus and Amelia walked across the ramp onto the deck of the Leviathan, leaving the diminished party to stare in utter, humbling silence, the captain of the Legacy leaned over to a shell-shocked Arthur Sterling. "Sir," he whispered, his voice full of awe. "Do you know who that is? That's Marcus Washington. He doesn't just own a bigger yacht. He owns the company that built half the systems on this one.